Consistent service asset, the Redeemer Plus Dependent Dividend Ledger. A new corporate NOR dossier.
Persistent Service Asset, MXTM aka Pirate 1 or VJ Tsunami X. August 7th, 2026. Chapter 25, Day 1. Redeemer Plus Lifecycle Stack, Maternity Partnership Division Family Legacy Program, Patient Information Sheet distributed via Hospital Quintana Roo Regional, Labor and Delivery Intake. Congratulations on your growing family. Hospital Quintana Roo Regional is proud to partner with Redeemer Plus Family Legacy Services to offer new parents a complimentary opportunity many families find brings real peace of mind. Voluntary enrollment of your newborn's cord blood, placental tissue, and baseline genomic profile into our secure family legacy library. What this means for your family. Asterisk your child's baseline biometric and genomic data is safely archived, at no cost to you, for potential future medical benefit. Asterisk in the rare event your family ever requires continuance care services at any point across your child's life, your family legacy enrollment provides expedited processing and preferred rate consideration. Asterisk enrollment is entirely voluntary and may be declined without any effect on your child's care today. Most families find this is simply one more way of making sure their child's future is a little more taken care of, right from day one. A representative will be by later today with the standard consent form. There's no rush at all. Take your time with your new arrival first. The room. Daniela Koch has been awake for 19 hours by the time anyone hands her the baby, and the exhaustion has gone somewhere past exhaustion, into a kind of wide, trembling clarity where the whole hospital room, the fluorescent panel above her, the soft beep of a monitor she stopped hearing as separate from her own heartbeat, Emilio's hand shaking slightly where it rests against her shoulder, feels closer and more vivid than anything has ever felt in her 26 years of being alive. The baby is small and furious and perfect, red-faced, one fist already working its way free of the swaddle the nurse wrapped a little too neatly, and Daniela looks at that fist and starts crying in the specific, helpless way that has nothing to do with the last 19 hours and everything to do with the fact that this exact person did not exist in the world yesterday and now, impossibly, permanently, does. She's got your temper already? Emilio says, voice thick, watching the small fist fight its way free of the blanket with what looks, in the exhausted logic of the room, exactly like determination. They name her Camila, after Emilio's grandmother, a woman neither of them ever met but who is, in the family stories, remembered as someone who once walked 11 kilometers into a hurricane to bring her sister's children in from a flooding house and never once. In 81 years, let anyone call it brave. It feels like a good name to hand a fist that's already fighting its way out of a blanket. They agree on it without much discussion, the way you agree on things at 4 in the morning when a decision this large has somehow become the easiest one either of you has made all day. The visit. The representative's name is Camila too, a small, warm coincidence she mentions gently when she introduces herself, holding a tablet loosely at her side rather than raising it the way the doctors have all day, as if she understands correctly that a raised tablet in this specific room right now would read as one thing too many. Congratulations, she says, and means it in the way people who do this every day still somehow manage to mean it. I won't take much of your time. I just wanted to walk you through the family legacy enrollment, in case you have any questions the sheet didn't cover. Emilio, still holding his daughter's hand between two fingers, the whole of it smaller than one of his knuckles, asks the only question either of them has energy left for. Is there any cost to us? Now or later? None at all, Camila says. It's genuinely just an archive. Most families think of it like a very thorough baby book, except this one's medical, and it might actually help her someday instead of just sitting in a drawer. And if we say no, then we wish you three all the best and nothing about her care today changes even slightly. Camila says, and it's true in the narrow, complete sense the sentence is built to be true in, and she is not, in this moment, lying to them about anything at all. Daniela looks at Emilio, and Emilio looks at the small furious fist still working against his finger, and neither of them has slept, and neither of them has the specific kind of tired, watchful suspicion it would take to ask the next question. The one that isn't on the sheet, the one about what preferred rate consideration actually means, decades from now. For a family none of them can yet imagine being in trouble, Because right now, at 4 in the morning, holding a person who did not exist yesterday, the sentence "this might help her someday" sounds like nothing except love, offered gently at no apparent cost by someone whose badge, if either of them thought to read it closely, says nothing more alarming than a first name and a smile. "Sure," Emilio says. "Why not?" Daniela signs the tablet one-handed, her other arm still curled protectively around Camila, and doesn't read past the first 2 lines, because the first 2 lines say exactly what Camila said out loud, and there is no version of this exhausted, radiant morning in which either of them has any reason to read further than that. The file. Subject ref. PSA 00001. Koch. C. Provisional. C note. Name on file. Koch. Camila. Date of archive. Day 1 enrolled by Koch D. and Koch E. Parents/guardians. Archived material. Asterisk cord blood. Cryopreserved asterisk placental tissue sample asterisk baseline genomic sequence. Full panel asterisk baseline biometric profile. Retinal, dermal ridge, vocal pattern. Note on reference format. Provisional asset reference numbers are assigned at family legacy enrollment for all archived subjects. Per standard unified asset catalog architecture. See cross-divisional asset optimization, reconciliation standard. Provisional status converts to active status automatically upon any future qualifying continuance event. No additional consent action is required at time of conversion. Active status automatically upon any lifetime value projection, internal, actuarial use only estimated household continuance probability, 80-year horizon, 34% estimated cumulative household lifetime value, all divisions, contingent on continuance event, 340,000 to 1,100,000 credits. Down the hall, past the nursery window where Camila Koch sleeps in a row of 6 other newborns, none of whom will ever meet each other again. A cleaning cart rolls past, pushed by a woman whose name badge reads nothing but a first name and whose hands, folding a stack of hand towels on the cart's lower shelf while she waits for the elevator, arrange them, without her noticing she's doing it, from white to cream to a pale, unnecessary gold last. On top, facing precisely outward before the doors open and she wheels the cart through. Redeemer Plus Internal Communications. Innovator Spotlight Series featured this quarter. Dr. Adrian Pizich, Chief Architect, SCSF Protocol. The technology that makes Redeemer Plus possible didn't start as a corporate product. It started as one engineer's determination to give a silenced man back his voice. Dr. Adrian Pesch joined a 2-person startup called Threshold Neurotechnologies 15 years ago as its second hire, straight out of his doctoral program, drawn by founder Dr. Elena Voss's mission to help locked-in patients like her husband Tomas communicate again. He was in the room, Dr. Pesch recalls fondly, for the very first sentence the device ever produced, and it was a joke that told me everything I needed to know about what we were really building. Not just a signal pathway, but a way of getting a whole person back. Following Redeemer Plus' acquisition of the underlying technology, Dr. Pesch led the engineering team responsible for adapting the platform into what is now the SCSF protocol, the certified backbone of our entire lifecycle stack. Asked what he's proudest of across a 15-year career, Dr. Pesch doesn't hesitate. Precision. We built something that does exactly, only, and reliably what it's certified to do. That discipline protects everyone the system touches. Dr. Pesch continues to serve on Threshold Institute's board alongside Dr. Voss, and describes the 2 halves of his career as 2 expressions of the same underlying belief, that the boundary between a person and their circumstances doesn't have to be the last word. Off the clock, Dr. Pesch is a devoted father of 2 and, in his words, a very average weekend fisherman and an even worse cook. The question. Sofia Balcazar has been on the External Ethics Advisory Board's research staff for 4 months, hired, along with 2 others, in the expansion that followed Delegate Osorio's site visit report, a hire she still isn't entirely sure whether to read as genuine institutional reform or as the same absorption cycle Xiomara Pena once wrote about, simply running one loop further out, and she has read, by now, more of Redeemer Plus' own internal documentation than almost anyone outside clinical affairs itself. She requests the meeting with Dr. Pesch through official channels, expecting deflection, and is surprised when his assistant schedules it for the following week without pushback. In his own office, no legal chaperone present. "You wanted to ask about the mesh," he says, before she's finished sitting down. Not unfriendly, just efficient. A man who has clearly decided in advance how much of his own time he's willing to spend not saying the actual thing. "I wanted to ask how you sleep," Sophia says, deciding on the spot that efficiency deserves efficiency back. "I've read the SCSF spec. I've read the Threshold Institute's founding materials. I know you built the same architecture twice, once to let a man finish a sentence, and once to make sure a different man never finishes one his handlers don't want. I'd like to understand how those two things live in the same head." Dr. Pesh doesn't flinch, which she'd half expected, and doesn't perform offense either, which she'd also half expected. He looks, instead, genuinely relieved, in a way that unsettles her more than defensiveness would have. "Almost nobody asks me that directly," he says. "They ask around it. Thank you for not doing that." The answer: "I'll tell you the honest version," he says, "which is longer than the version in that spotlight piece and less flattering, and I'd ask you to actually sit with it rather than decide in the first 30 seconds which box to file me in. I left Threshold's founding mission the day Meridian's board voted to reallocate the research budget. I want to be precise about that. I didn't drift into this. I sat in that boardroom, I heard the vote, and afterward I went and found the technical lead who'd need to actually build what the board had just approved, and I told her I wanted the job. Here's why. I'd already spent 4 years by then understanding that architecture better than almost anyone alive. I knew exactly what it could and couldn't be made to do, and I understood with total clarity that the reallocation was happening regardless of whether I was in the room for it. Meridian didn't need me specifically. They needed someone who could do what I could do, and the pool of people with that specific competence was small enough that I knew most of their names. So the real question I was answering, sitting in that boardroom, wasn't should this exist. It was already going to exist. The question was whether the person building it would be someone who'd spent 4 years thinking about what a nervous system owes the person attached to it, or whether it would be whoever Meridian found next who might not care at all. I built the isolation boundary in the SCSF protocol tighter than it needed to be technically for compliance. I built in the residue tolerance, the small allowances for behavior that leaks past isolation, the thing your files call operational residue. Do you know why that exists? Because my first version sealed cleaner than that. Completely clean. No leakage at all. And I looked at what a completely sealed boundary actually produced in trials, and I couldn't do it. I built the imperfection in on purpose. I made sure something always gets through. The cost. Sophia sits with that for a long moment before she asks the next thing, because she can hear, underneath the fluency of it, that this is not a speech he's giving for the first time, and she wants to find the part that isn't rehearsed. "You have a daughter," she says. 14, I think. Does she know what her father built?" Something in his face changes. Not guilt, exactly, something closer to a door he keeps very carefully shut most days, being asked, politely, to open for a stranger. "My son," he says. "Not my daughter. My son is 9. He has a congenital condition that will, almost certainly, at some point in his life, put our family in a room very much like the one your board visited on its last tour." He says it flatly, factually, the way you disclose a number rather than a wound, and Sophia understands, watching him, that this flatness is itself years of practice. "I think about that boundary I built every single day," he says. "Not abstractly. I think about it as the thing standing or not standing between my son and whatever a company with worse engineers than me decides is efficient. I can't stop the kin yield clause from existing. I've done the math on that more times than you'd believe. Walking away doesn't repeal a statute, doesn't dissolve a company, doesn't even slow the placement algorithm down by a single quarter. What I can do, what I have done for 11 years, the only lever I've ever actually had, is make sure that whoever ends up in one of those pods, including possibly my own son, ends up there with a boundary built by someone who couldn't make himself seal it all the way shut. That's not nothing," he says, quieter now. "I need you to understand that I know it's also not enough. I have never once told myself it was enough. I don't think enough is a category available to anyone in this building. I think the honest choice every single day is between two kinds of not enough, and I chose the one where I'm still in the room. What she doesn't ask. Sophia doesn't ask him the follow-up question sitting directly behind her tongue. Whether he has ever run the numbers on what residue tolerance actually buys the people underneath it. Whether a boundary built slightly less clean produces anything for them beyond a towel nudged half an inch, a thumb tracing an absent seam, a hum nobody left alive to hear it can translate anymore. She doesn't ask it because she can see, watching him, that he has already asked it of himself more times and more honestly than she ever could from outside the architecture, and that the answer he's arrived at, not enough but still something, and I'd rather be the one deciding how much, is not a lie he's telling her. It's the actual floor he's built to stand on, load-bearing, the only one available to him that isn't a fall. She thinks, walking out past the framed photo on his office wall, a boy, maybe 7 in the picture, laughing at something off-camera, one hand blurred mid-motion, about Renata Poot, whose exit interview she has also read, whose recorded testimony sits under a legal hold Sophia's board clearance somehow improbably gives her access to. Poot recognized a reference number and couldn't live inside the distance anymore. Pesh has spent 11 years making the distance itself into his life's work, narrowing it, degree by degree, the only increment he believes is actually his to move. She doesn't know, leaving his office, which of the two of them she thinks is right. She isn't sure by that evening that the question is built to have an answer at all, only that Redeemer Plus has, across 26 years of operation, found a use for both kinds of person. The one who leaves and becomes a caution filed for 7 years under legal hold, and the one who stays and becomes 11 years running, the single reason the wall isn't worse than it is. Redeemer Plus Clinical Affairs SCSF Protocol, Revision History, Excerpt. REV 1.0, Class C Isolation, Full Boundary Closure. Residue Events, 0%, Field Trial. Chief Architect Note. Withdrawn prior to certification. See Rev 2.0. Rev 2.0, Class C Isolation, Tolerance Threshold introduced, 0.3 to 0.6% residue rate. Certified, Current Production Standard. Chief Architect Note, Tolerance range is a deliberate design parameter, not a manufacturing limitation. Recommend against future optimization proposals targeting full closure. Rev 4.2, Current Standard, SCSF Protocol Rev 4.2, All Facilities. Tolerance parameter unchanged from Rev 2.0 across 11 years and 6 subrevisions. Chapter 27. Sovereign Yield. Redeemer Plus Sovereign Solutions Sovereign Continuance Partnership. Indicative term sheet prepared for Ministry of Finance, Republic of Costa Marisma Restriction Level. Sovereign Client, Cabinet Distribution. Subject: Debt Service Relief via Correctional Population Continuance 01. The problem: the Republic currently allocates 14.2% of annual budget to debt service on bonds issued during the 2031 infrastructure program, against a correctional system operating at 340% of rated capacity, with per-inmate annual cost exceeding comparable regional benchmarks by 61% due to aging facility infrastructure and mandated minimum staffing ratios. Conventional austerity options, facility construction, staffing reduction, early release reform, each carry political costs the current government has publicly and repeatedly declined to accept. 02. The structure Redeemer Plus Sovereign Solutions proposes a correctional continuance partnership. Qualifying incarcerated individuals, sentenced, non-appealable, meeting minimum remaining sentence thresholds, are transferred to Redeemer Plus custody under existing life cycle stack architecture, in exchange for immediate debt principal reduction of 22% on outstanding infrastructure bonds, structured as a direct Redeemer Plus Sovereign Solutions purchase and retirement of debt instruments elimination of all ongoing correctional facility operating cost for transferred population a recurring sovereign yield remittance, quarterly, indexed to transferred population deployment value across Redeemer Plus divisions 03. Legal basis: the Republic's existing penal code already vests the state with full custodial authority over sentenced individuals, including authority to contract correctional services to private operators. No new legislative authority is required. Redeemer Plus Sovereign Solutions is, under this framework, a correctional services contractor. a classification with established precedent across multiple regional jurisdictions. 04. Note on framing: Redeemer Plus recommends this partnership be introduced publicly as a correctional modernization and fiscal relief initiative. Internal messaging should avoid any reference to kin yield, service debt, or other consumer-facing program terminology, which tests poorly with incarcerated population framing across all regions surveyed. The Minister. Elvira Cordero has been Minister of Finance for 11 months, long enough to have stopped being surprised by how few good options ever actually reach her desk, and she reads the term sheet twice before she lets herself feel anything about it at all, because feeling something about a number before you've finished modeling it is, in her experience, how ministers end up making decisions they can't defend in committee. The bond markets have been unkind to the Republic for 3 years running, ever since the infrastructure program's cost overruns became public and the correctional system. She has visited 2 of the 4 major facilities herself, has stood in a processing block built for 600 currently holding just over 2,000, has become the kind of budget line that every finance ministry eventually inherits, too large to ignore, too politically radioactive to fix through any of the normal levers, a slow bleed everyone in government has quietly agreed to manage rather than solve. She brings it to the president privately before cabinet, the way she's learned to bring him anything that might make him angry at the messenger rather than the message. 22% principal reduction, he says, reading the summary page twice. On the infrastructure bonds specifically. Yes, Señor Presidente. That's the number the ratings agencies flagged as our credibility problem. He sets the page down. This fixes the thing that's actually costing us the election. It fixes the fiscal symptom, Elvira says carefully. I want to be direct that I don't yet know what it does to the rest of it. The rest of what? The part where we're the government that sold its prisoners to a hospitality company, she says, and watches him not quite flinch, which tells her more than anything he says next. We're not selling anyone, he says. We're contracting correctional services, exactly like every regional government that's outsourced prison management for 20 years. Nothing in this term sheet asks us to do anything the penal code doesn't already permit. I know, Elvira says. That's what makes it easy to sign. I don't think that's the same thing as it being easy to live with later, once people understand what correctional services contractor actually means once you follow the chain far enough. He doesn't answer that directly, which she understands watching him is itself the answer. The population. Wilmer Salgado is 34 years old and has served 4 years of a 7-year sentence for a fraud conviction that began 3 years before his arrest. As an unpaid family medical debt he restructured through a private lender who turned out not to be licensed to restructure anything, a fact Wilmer didn't know and the court, ultimately, decided he should have. He works the prison's small metal shop most days, has a wife who visits when the bus fare allows and 2 kids who are 11 and 8 now and were 7 and 4 when he went in, and has spent 4 years doing the specific, disciplined arithmetic every long sentence teaches a person. 3 years left, then 2 years and 8 months, then this spring 2 years and 2 months, a number he's watched shrink with something that isn't quite hope but is at least its close, patient cousin. The announcement comes over the block speaker system on a Tuesday morning, flat and administrative. The same voice that announces meal counts and lockdowns. Qualifying inmates with remaining sentences exceeding 18 months are to report, by housing block, for a continuance eligibility review, mandatory, non-optional, effective immediately. There is no lounge with a water wall. There is no coordinator sliding a tablet gently across a glass table. No pacing anyone is asked whether they need. There is a folding table in the block's processing room, a Redeemer Plus intake technician working through a list with the brisk efficiency of someone with 200 more names to clear before end of shift, and a single sentence, delivered without ceremony, that Wilmer will replay for the rest of whatever remains of his life in whatever form that turns out to take. Salgado W. Sentence remaining, 2 years, 2 months. You've been selected for correctional continuance transfer, effective this facility's next processing cycle. Sign here to acknowledge notification. Selected, Wilmer says. Selected by who? For what? Acknowledgement isn't consent. The technician says, not unkindly, just factually, sliding the form and a pen across the table without looking up. It's just acknowledgement that you've been informed. The transfer's already authorized at the ministry level. This is paperwork, not a decision point. There is no question here about what happens to his wife's grief, because there is no expectation that anyone in this room considers grief a relevant input at all. There is no legacy simulation clone offered, no revenue share yield structured for his family, because his family isn't a customer in this transaction, the Republic is, and the Republic has already been paid. Wilmer Salgado signs the acknowledgement form because the alternative, not signing, changes nothing about what happens next except which box gets checked on a form nobody upstairs will ever read a second time. Redeemer Plus Sovereign Solutions, Correctional Continuance, Transfer Manifest. Facility, Costa Marisma Correctional Complex, Block C Transfer Cycle, Q2, Phase 1 Qualifying Population Identified, 3,140 transferred. This cycle, 812 remaining sentence. AVG, Transferred Population 3.4 years next OFKIN notification. Not required per Republic Penal Code, Custodial Authority vested in State. Asset ref assigned, Salgado W. Facility, PSA, CM, 00812, M intake route. Direct to SCSF. No family, facing consent process. State authorized custodial transfer, what never gets asked. There is no lounge for Wilmer Salgado, and no lounge means no version of Refugio's 28-year ledger resolving to zero, no version of Marisol Chan's honest, aching testimony, no version of even the thin, coerced choice Fernando and Beatrice Cannell spent 4 years defending against a system that at least had to pretend, at every step, that a family's word mattered until the exact moment it stopped mattering. What the Republic's arrangement removes, cleanly, structurally, is the fig leaf every prior chapter of this book has documented families being handed, worn thin, but handed nonetheless, the requirement that somebody, somewhere, however manipulated, however cornered, has to say yes. A government does not have to be manipulated into consent. A government has custody already, and custody, once contracted, requires no persuasion at all, only a term sheet, a signature from someone whose name will be in the history books for a different reason entirely, and a wire transfer that shows up 11 days later as exactly the number the ratings agencies wanted to see. Costa Marisma Sovereign Bond, Ratings Agency Commentary. The Republic's Correctional Modernization and Fiscal Relief Initiative represents a credible, structural improvement to the sovereign's debt service profile. We are revising our outlook from negative to stable, reflecting reduced near-term refinancing risk and demonstrated fiscal discipline. Bond yield, 10-year, minus 140 BPS, week following announcement. Wilmer's wife, Noemi, finds out he's been transferred to a modernization program from a form letter mailed to their house 6 weeks after the fact, written in language close enough to the correctional system's ordinary bureaucratic register that she doesn't understand, reading it standing in her own doorway with the mail still in her hand, that anything has actually changed at all, only that the visitation schedule she's kept faithfully for 4 years, bus fare and all, no longer has anywhere on the map to be kept for. Dashboard. Persistent search. Chapter 28, The Residue Ledger. Redeemer Plus External Ethics Advisory Board Research Query, request submitted by S. Query. Aggregate residue event logs, all divisions, all facilities, trailing 24 months. Filter. Technician annotation field non-empty. Exclude auto-generated code-only entries. Note from requester. Prior review has treated residue events as individually cosmetic. I would like to review a larger sample together, rather than one file at a time before I form a view either way. Sophia runs the query on a Thursday night after everyone else on the research floor has gone home, expecting, if she's honest with herself, mostly noise, a dataset large enough to be meaningless, the kind of thing you skim for an hour and file under inconclusive because inconclusive is what 4 months on this board have taught her most things eventually turn out to be. The query returns 41,206 entries. She filters for annotated ones, the minority where a technician, for whatever reason, typed something beyond the standard code and gets 1,884. She reads the first 100 in order exactly as they come, and then stops reading in order because she has started, without quite deciding to, sorting them into piles. Cluster 1. Recurring Sequence Behavior. Residue log extract, sorted by technician, recurring sequence. Asset Ref, PSA 4471, F, Balam, I. Housekeeping, East Tower Annotation. Nudges linen into color order beyond task spec. Consistent, daily, subthreshold. Doesn't affect turnover time. Kind of nice, honestly. Guests notice. Asset Ref, PSA 11840M Kitchen Prep. Cenote Skyfish District Annotation. Lines up prep knives smallest to largest before every shift. Unprompted, not on checklist. Corrected twice by supervisor for efficiency. Resumed both times within the hour. Logged, no action. Asset Ref, PSA 06203, F Housekeeping. MSL 1, Bali, Annotation. Arranges guest toiletries in size order on the vanity. Not part of standard turnover. Recurs every room, every shift, 6 months running. Asset Ref, PSA CM 00812 M Salgado W. Correctional Continuance, Textile Processing Annotation. Sorts fabric scraps by shade before bagging for disposal. Task doesn't require sorting. Flagged twice, self-corrects same day. Sophia reads Wilmer Salgado's line 4 times before she moves on. She doesn't know his name means anything specific. There's nothing in the log connecting it to a fraud conviction, a wife named Noemi, 2 kids who were 7 and 4 when he went in. She only knows, from the shape of the entry itself, that whatever routed him into this dataset arrived here with no lounge, no ledger resolving to 0, no family in a doorway holding a form letter. He is, in this file, indistinguishable in kind from Itzel Balam, from a stranger in Bali, from a kitchen worker 40 minutes from where Sophia is sitting right now. For different lives, for different doors, the exact same small, patient insistence on putting something in an order nobody asked for, surfacing on schedule every shift, for as long as any of them have been logged. Cluster 2. Vocal/subvocal loop. Residue log extract, sorted by technician, vocal/subvocal. Asset Ref, PSA 4417, M, Valenzuela, M. Guest Services, East Wing Annotation. Mouths what looks like counting. No audible sound, during idle intervals. Doesn't interrupt task performance. Ceiling lights, maybe? Kind of sweet. Asset Ref, PSA 19940, F Elder Continuance. Domestic Placement Annotation. Hums a 2-note interval low, during unsupervised intervals only. Stops immediately if approached. Been doing it since intake for years now. Asset Ref, PSA 30011, M Mining Division. Extraction Site 7 Annotation. Whispers something during rest cycle. Mic pickup too low to transcribe reliably. Sounds repetitive, same few syllables. Not flagged as distress linked. Asset Ref, PSA 9902, M ITZAR. Defense Solutions, Maritime Continuance, Helm Unit, Annotation. No vocal apparatus post-terminal salvage. Equivalent signal shows up as unprompted micro-adjustments to heading. Time to what looks like a rhythm rather than any actual weather input. Best helm performance in the squadron regardless. Leaving it alone. Sophia sits back from the screen for a while after that last one. She has read, by now, the terminal salvage protocol brief 3 separate times, has understood intellectually, the way you understand a diagram, that a cranial unit with no vocal apparatus can still be logged as producing a vocal equivalent signal. She had not understood until reading a technician's own casual, unbothered phrase for it. Time to what looks like a rhythm, that the thing surfacing on that bridge might not be new. It might be the same 2-note interval a different technician, a continent away, described as kind of sweet, still running, still finding its way out through whatever channel is left, degree by degree, year after year, into a ship's navigation log instead of a hallway. The pattern she wasn't looking for. She almost stops there. It's late and she has, by any reasonable board standard, more than enough for a preliminary finding, hundreds of entries, dismissed individually as cosmetic, that read together as something closer to a sustained, structural, wildly inconvenient fact. But something in the entry's timestamps has been nagging at her for the last hour, a pattern she can't quite name until she pulls the full 41,206 row set back up and does the thing she should have done first. Plots residue event frequency not by asset, not by facility, but by a single shared variable none of the technicians ever had reason to compare across files. Days since transfer. Internal working note, S. Balxer residue event frequency versus days since transfer, all assets, N equals 41,206. Baseline residue rate holds flat and low across most of the interval, consistent with the 0.3 to 0.6% tolerance range documented in SCSF protocol Rev 4.2, Rev history. Deviation. Statistically significant frequency spikes recur at intervals of approximately 365 days, clustered within a plus or minus 3-day window, across the full asset population, independent of division, facility, origin, king yield / service debt / correctional, or asset age. Spike magnitude. Residue rate 2.8x baseline during window. Recurrence. Consistent across every measured transfer anniversary to date, for every asset with sufficient tenure to test it. This is not explainable by facility scheduling, seasonal guest volume, maintenance cycles, or any operational variable I can identify. The only variable that predicts the spike is the date, for each individual asset, on which their file was originally closed. I don't have a clinical explanation for this. I'm not sure Redeemer Plus has one either because as far as I can tell from the record, nobody has ever run this specific comparison before. Nothing in the tolerance model accounts for a memory of the date. Nothing in the isolation architecture is supposed to retain calendar information at all. I don't know what to do with this yet. I'm putting it in the file because if I don't write it down tonight, some later, more tired version of me is going to talk myself into believing I didn't really see it. The last entry she reads. She almost closes the laptop there. Then, mostly out of the same restless, unfinished energy that made her run the query in the first place, she filters one more time, for entries dated within the last 30 days, sorted newest first, and the very top of the list is a facility code she doesn't immediately recognize, cross-referenced when she looks it up to Hospital Quintana Roo Regional Maternity Partnership Division. Residue log, single entry, asset ref, PSA 00001, COH, C, provisional, division, family legacy library, archival status, no active deployment, annotation. N/A. Provisional assets are archive only and generate no task performance telemetry. Status. No residue event possible under current classification. Flag, none. There is nothing to read here. That's what stops her longest of anything all night. Not a finding, but the absence of one. A single clean line sitting at the very top of a file otherwise built entirely out of small, patient, inconvenient noise. A newborn's cord blood in a vault 3 floors below a maternity ward, provisional, dormant, generating nothing yet, waiting the way the whole architecture of this company has always known how to wait, for the day, whenever it comes, that a triggering event finally gives this line something to say. Sophia closes the laptop a little after 2 in the morning and doesn't sleep and does not yet know. Sitting in the dark of an office 4 months into a job she still isn't sure whether to call reform or absorption, whether the working note she just wrote is the beginning of something, or the exact document that will end her career the way a different reference number once ended someone else's, 11 years and 1 legal hold ago, in a file she has read and reread and still doesn't know how to stop thinking of as a warning rather than a precedent. Chapter 29. The third label. Redeemer Plus Office of Institutional Failure Analysis, Charter Summary Distribution. Public, Harm Minimization Charter, Article 7 Compliance Disclosure. The office exists independently of communications, legal, and regional operations, reporting directly to the board's audit committee. Its mandate is narrow and specific: determine, for any qualifying institutional failure, whether the cause was negligence, corruption, emergent system behavior, or policy itself functioning as designed, and to record permanently what changed afterward. Every case file is archived under 3 labels: what happened, why it happened, and what changed afterward. A file missing the third label is not considered closed, regardless of how much time has passed. Cases meeting the misconduct threshold are sealed as black files: every email, every recording, every draft preserved, no executive authorized to order destruction, and released automatically after 30 years without further review regardless of who objects at the time. The office does not determine what qualifies. That determination is made upstream, against criteria the office itself has spent 9 years, and for separate board challenges trying to widen. The referral. Sophia has requested this meeting through channels she wasn't entirely sure existed until Chuck's assistant confirmed the appointment within the hour, which told her something about the office before she'd even walked into it. Ileana Chuck reads the working note twice in silence at her desk, while Sophia sits across from her trying to read the room instead of the document, because she has learned in 9 months on this board that the room usually tells her more. "You ran this across the full network," Chuck says finally. "Not a question. 41,000 entries. It's not noise. The recurrence at the transfer anniversary is statistically clean across every division that's old enough to test it." Chuck sets the printout down and looks at it for a long moment before she looks at Sophia. "Do you know how many black files I've opened in 9 years? No. 6. Do you know how many I've wanted to open? Sophia doesn't answer that one, because she's starting to understand it isn't really a question. What doesn't qualify? "I want to be straight with you about something," Chuck says, "because you clearly did the hard part correctly, and I'd rather you understand the actual shape of the wall you just walked into than leave here thinking I dismissed you. A black file requires a threshold event. Misconduct, a violation of policy of the charter of a specific citable standard someone was supposed to meet and didn't. What you found isn't that. Nobody hid this data. It was logged faithfully exactly as the tolerance model requires in 41,000 separate entries by technicians who did their jobs correctly every single time. The failure, if it is one, isn't that someone broke a rule. It's that the rule never asked anyone to look at 400 files at once instead of one. You found something true by doing something nobody's job description told them to do. That's not a violation. That's just a blind spot nobody built a violation category for. So it doesn't count, Sophia says. It doesn't fit, Chuck says. Those aren't the same thing, and I've spent 9 years trying to make the board understand the difference, with mixed success. Article 7 of the Charter obligates the company to investigate any credible finding of harm arising from certified technology operating within spec. I've cited Article 7 4 times. I've gotten a hearing twice. I've gotten a policy change 0 times, because operating within spec is exactly the phrase every division uses to close the door before I finish the sentence. The narrower door. What I can do, Chuck says, is open a pattern inquiry. It's not a black file. It doesn't seal, it doesn't get 30 years of guaranteed daylight, and there's no requirement anyone outside clinical affairs ever sees the result. What it does is force a technical review. Someone with actual authority over the isolation architecture has to look at your data and answer, on the record, whether it means what you think it might mean. Who has that authority? One person, really, who's spent his whole career on exactly this boundary. Chuck is already pulling up a routing form. Dr. Pesch's team built the tolerance parameter you're describing. If anyone in this company can tell us whether a recurring annual signal is residue or something the model was never designed to notice, it's him. I'll route it there today. And if he finds something. Chuck looks at her for a long moment, the look Sophia will think later, of someone deciding how much of 9 years of accumulated, hard-won limits to hand a person on her first real case. Then it becomes his finding to bring back to a board that has never once, in 9 years, been asked a question it didn't already have 3 ways to survive. I'm not telling you not to hope. I'm telling you what hoping has bought me so far is 6 sealed files and 1 very well-defended office nobody wants to sit next to. The log. Pattern Inquiry Registration Office of Institutional Failure Analysis. Case No. PI 041. Origin, Research Query, External Ethics Advisory Board, Balcazar, S. Subject, Recurring Residue Frequency Anomaly, Transfer Anniversary Correlated, Network-Wide Routed to Clinical Affairs, Office of the Chief Architect, Pesch, A. Classification, Pattern Inquiry, does not meet black file threshold per Charter Article 7, Section 2, no identified violation of certified operating standard, public disclosure requirement, none review deadline, none specified. Case remains open under Label 1 and Label 2. Label 3 field will remain blank pending technical review, for as long as that review takes. Sophia leaves Chuck's office with a case number instead of an answer, which is, she's starting to understand, roughly what every serious person in this building has learned to call progress. That's where I'd naturally close this one. Sophia's finding now sits in the one part of Redeemer genuinely built to take it seriously, and also in the one part with the least power to do anything about it once it doesn't fit a box. That tension is a good hinge if you want it. Chuck, Pesh, and the charter are all now live threads I can pull on. I read the fuller supplemental material too, the war economy angle, the harm minimization charter's full articles, the covert ops/cartel arc, AGI officers eventually replacing executives, the peace dividend causes recession idea. That's a real expansion, not a small addition, so I held it back rather than bending this chapter to fit all of it at once. Whenever you want it, it's ready to become its own arc, the San Aurelio thread, the regional director's covert operation, or the charter itself, Article 7 is already seated, are all clean entry points. Chapter 30. The Anniversary Problem. Redeemer Plus Clinical Affairs, Laboratory Working File Pattern Inquiry PI 041. Technical Review. Office of the Chief Architect. Dr. Pesh assigns the file to himself rather than delegating it, which his team notices immediately, because in 11 years he has done that exactly twice before, both times, his lead engineer Cassandra will say later, for reasons that turned out to matter. First pass. The team's working assumption going in is that Sofia Balcazar's dataset describes an artifact of something mundane, a scheduling variable nobody thought to control for, a maintenance cycle, a hardware drift pattern that happens to recur roughly annually because most of the equipment it's riding on gets serviced roughly annually. Ruling out the boring explanation first is standard practice, and Cassandra runs the elimination pass over 4 days with the specific, satisfying thoroughness of someone who expects, at the end of it, to file this as solved. Facility maintenance cycles. No correlation. Servicing windows are staggered by facility, not by asset, and the residue spikes track individual transfer dates regardless of which facility an asset currently sits in. Seasonal guest volume. No correlation. The pattern holds identically for correctional continuance assets, which have no guest-facing seasonality at all. OmniMesh hardware calibration drift. No correlation. Calibration cycles run on a fixed 90-day interval, uniform across the fleet, uncorrelated with any individual asset's transfer date. Staffing rotation schedules. No correlation. Residue spikes occur regardless of which technician, supervisor, or shift is on duty at the time. By the 4th day, Cassandra brings Pesh a summary with every mundane hypothesis crossed off the list and says the thing neither of them has said out loud yet. It's not the facility remembering something. It's tracking a specific date. Every asset's own date. The test case. Pesh pulls one file himself by hand, rather than running the aggregate, a habit from early in his career, the belief that you understand a pattern first in one life and only afterward in 41,000. Asset Ref PSA 4417 M, Valenzuela M. Residue Event Log, full tenure. 18 years of entries. A 2-note interval recurring, logged consistently as low amplitude, non-distress linked, dismissed 1,000 times over as cosmetic. Pesh overlays the event timestamps against the one date that exists nowhere in this file's operational record at all, because operational records don't track it. The date of original transfer, 18 years ago, pulled instead from an entirely separate archive. The guardianship log filed the week Mateo Valenzuela's grandmother signed a tablet in a Golden Cream lounge. The spikes cluster within 3 days of that date. Every year. For 18 years across 4 different facilities, 2 different divisional reassignments, and 1 hardware refresh that replaced the physical mesh substrate entirely in year 11. A full component swap that should have reset anything mechanical, anything merely residual in the sense the tolerance model has always meant that word. The pattern survived the hardware. What 11 years taught him not to ask. Pesh sits with this alone in his office for longer than he tells anyone about. That first evening, running the one test he has never once, in 11 years of defending the tolerance boundary as a deliberate mercy, actually run, because running it means finding out whether the mercy he built was real, or whether he built a door slightly ajar onto a room he assumed, without ever quite checking, was empty on the other side. An anniversary is not a rhythm. A rhythm is what the tolerance model was built to expect, the 2-note interval itself, the thumb tracing a seam, small motor loops that repeat on their own schedule with no reference to anything outside the body producing them. An anniversary requires something else entirely. A signal capable of integrating experience across a full year, of holding a single date apart from the 364 that surround it, of knowing, in some form the certification documents were never written to account for, that today is different. Nothing in the SCSF protocol's isolation architecture was designed to preserve that capacity. Pesch built the boundary himself. He knows exactly what it was supposed to seal off, and calendar continuity, the specific, integrated, autobiographical kind of memory that would let something mark an anniversary rather than simply repeat emotion, sits well inside the isolated column, sealed, certified, closed. Or it was supposed to. The call he doesn't make. He thinks that night about his son, 9 years old, laughing at something off camera in the photograph on his office wall, a boy whose condition will, almost certainly, at some point, put him in a room like the one Delegate Osorio toured. Pesch has told himself, for 11 years, that his whole justification for staying in this building was narrowing the distance between what the architecture does and what a person underneath it has to survive. He has never once, until tonight, had to ask himself what it would mean if the distance he spent 11 years narrowing was never as narrow as he needed it to be. He does not call his wife. He does not, that night, draft anything for the file. He sits in an empty lab with Mateo Valenzuela's 18 years of eliminated hypotheses open on the screen in front of him, and for the first time in 11 years, the sentence he has always used to get himself back to work in the morning, not enough but still something, and I'd rather be the one deciding how much, does not arrive. The report. He writes it anyway 3 days later, in full, without softening a single finding, because whatever else is true about the last 11 years, he has never once handed the record something other than what the data actually showed. Technical finding. Pattern Inquiry PI 041 submitted. Office of the Chief Architect. Recurring residue frequency anomaly is confirmed, network-wide, statistically robust, correlated specifically with individual transfer anniversary dates rather than any facility, hardware, or scheduling variable. Anomaly persists across full hardware substrate replacement, indicating the correlated capacity is not attributable to the physical mesh component and may reflect retained integration function inconsistent with current isolation boundary specification. Recommendation: immediate independent replication study. Recommend board briefing under Charter Article 7. Given credible indication that certified technology may not be performing the isolation function its certification represents. I want to state plainly, for the record, that I am the certifying engineer of record for the specification in question, and that this finding calls that certification into direct question. I am submitting it in full regardless. What the file becomes. Office of the Chief Architect, Legal and Regulatory Review Response to Technical Finding, PI 041. Reviewed finding is scientifically significant and merits continued study. Current evidence, while statistically notable, does not conclusively establish retained subjective experience versus complex residual signal propagation, a distinction current diagnostic methodology cannot resolve with certainty. Absent conclusive determination, finding does not meet the evidentiary threshold for Article 7 escalation to board briefing. Recommend continued pattern inquiry status, extended monitoring, quarterly technical review. No change to current certification status pending further data. Chuck reads the response twice before she calls Pesch herself, and neither of them says much on that call worth recording here, because they have both, in their own separate rooms, in their own separate years, already learned exactly what this particular sentence is built to do, and neither one is surprised anymore by how well it does it. Pattern Inquiry PI 041. Status Update. Label 1. Recorded. Label 2. Recorded. Contested. Label 3. Pending. Case remains open. No review deadline specified. That night, Pesch sits on the floor of his son's room while the boy sleeps, watching him breathe, and does not, for once, have a sentence ready for himself in the morning. Chapter 31. The Annex. Threshold Institute. Research Ethics Charter. Founding article adopted at incorporation. Unamended since. No technology developed, licensed, or derived from Institute research may be deployed in any application where the subject's capacity for consent cannot be independently verified, or where the subject's ongoing awareness of their circumstances cannot be ruled out by rigorous, replicable evidence. We built this technology to reach people the world had already decided were unreachable. We did not build it to decide on anyone else's behalf that a person was safely beyond reaching. Elena Voss keeps a framed copy of this paragraph on the wall of her actual office. Not the ceremonial one with the plaque, the small cluttered room 2 buildings over where she still does real work, and has for 17 years. She wrote it herself the week after the 412th attempt, before there was a company attached to any of it at all. The visit. Adrian Pesch doesn't call ahead, which is itself out of character enough that Elena knows something is wrong before he said a word. Standing in her doorway on a Tuesday evening with a folder held against his chest the way you'd hold something you were afraid of dropping. "I need this to be off the record," he says. "Not board business. Not yet. I need to show you something as a colleague, and I need you to understand before I do that showing it to you is very likely the end of my career, and I'm doing it anyway, and I need you to actually hear that before you open the folder." She lets him in. She has known him 15 years, watched him grow from her second hire into a man with his own son and his own quiet, careful compromises, and she has never once seen him look like this. He tells her about Sofia Balcazar's dataset first, the shape of it, the anniversary correlation, the hardware replacement survival. Then he tells her what legal's response called it, and what that response actually meant, in the plain language he spent 11 years learning not to use out loud in that building. "They're not disputing the finding," he says. "They're disputing whether it clears a bar they get to set after they've seen the data. It doesn't matter what the science says. It matters whether the science says it loudly enough to survive a sentence like, 'Current diagnostic methodology cannot resolve with certainty.' I wrote that architecture, Elena. I know exactly how much certainty it's capable of producing, and I know exactly how much they're pretending they need before they'll let themselves believe it." What she already knows. Elena reads the file at her kitchen table, slowly, twice, and doesn't say anything for a long time, and Pesch has learned enough about her over 15 years to know that her silences are where the actual thinking happens, so he doesn't fill it. She is thinking about a hospital bed, 3 years into a marriage that had already, by then, quietly become a vigil. She is thinking about the specific, particular horror of being fully present behind eyes that no longer obeyed her, watching people she loved grieve her while she was still entirely undiminished inside. A horror she has spent 38 years since trying to make sure no other family would have to survive without a way through it. She built a bridge. That was the whole of it, the whole simple, sufficient ambition of her entire adult life. Build a bridge back out. She sets the file down. "I need you to say the actual sentence," she says. "Not the euphemism. Say what you think this means." Pesch doesn't look away from her. "I think there's a real possibility that some meaningful fraction of the people in that architecture are aware. Not vaguely, not as residual noise. Aware enough to mark a date. I think the isolation boundary I built and have spent 11 years being proud of restraining may not restrain the thing it's certified to restrain. I think I might have spent 11 years telling myself I was building a door slightly ajar, when what I might have actually built is a door with a very good lock, and someone still, every year on the same day, trying the handle." Elena closes her eyes. When she opens them, whatever softness 15 years of friendship has always kept in her expression around him is gone, replaced by something he recognizes immediately, because he's seen photographs of it. The same look, 38 years younger, standing in a converted garage at midnight, refusing to let 411 failures be the last word. "Then we're going to find out for certain," she says. "Properly, independently, not through their diagnostics, through mine. And Adrian, I want to be very clear with you before we go one step further down this road. I am not going to let anyone tell me the word inconclusive twice. The leverage." She writes the letter that night at her own kitchen table in her own name and doesn't show Pesch the final draft until it's already sent, which he understands, reading it the next morning, is exactly the point. Letter to the Board of Redeemer Plus Lifecycle Stack Holdings. Essay. From Dr. Elena Voss, Founder Emeritus, Threshold Institute, Member, Board of Directors. I am writing in my capacity as founder of the underlying architecture licensed to this company 17 years ago, and as a signatory to the licensing agreement Section 4 clause reserving Institute review rights over any application raising unresolved consent or awareness questions, a clause I insisted on at the time and which, until this week, I did not expect to ever need to invoke. I have reviewed a technical finding indicating that certified isolation architecture derived from threshold research may not be performing the isolation function its certification represents. I am formally requesting, under Section 4, independent access for Institute researchers to replicate this finding using our own protocols, on a timeline of our own determination, with full data access and no confidentiality restriction on our conclusions. I would remind the board that my name is on a research wing this company built, in part, to associate itself publicly with the mission I founded this technology to serve. I do not intend to let that association continue to mean nothing. I expect a response within 5 business days. Pesh reads it twice at his own kitchen table, the same folder still sitting between them from the night before, and understands, for the first time since he sat down in that boardroom 11 years ago and decided which kind of not enough he could live inside, that the distance he spent a career trying to narrow might, finally, for the first time, be about to move by more than one careful degree at a time. Discussion about this Chapter 32, Patch Notes. Redeemer Plus Lifecycle Stack, Engineering Change Order ECO 4471. Priority. Expedited Subject. OmniMesh Isolation Consistency Directive, version 4.2.1. Field audits across the certified fleet have identified minor variants in Class C isolation boundary tolerance relative to original certification parameters, attributable to normal long-term signal drift. This directive standardizes isolation tolerance to a tighter, more consistent specification across all deployed units, improving certification compliance margin fleet-wide. Deployment method. Remote firmware push, local-first architecture, no facility downtime required. Deployment window, 72 hours from authorization. No change to guest-facing task performance, hospitality metrics, or firmware satisfaction index is expected as a result of this update. The room. Marcela Duarte, General Counsel, doesn't raise her voice in board meetings, which is precisely why the room goes quiet the moment she starts talking. 4 days into the 5 Elena Voss gave them. "We cannot refuse the Section 4 request," she says. "I want that stated plainly before anyone in this room spends another minute discussing whether we can. The licensing agreement is unambiguous, Dr. Voss's standing to invoke it is unambiguous, and any refusal creates a breach claim from a founder with a public platform this company spent 17 years building specifically so people would trust it. That door is closed. So we comply," says a director whose name won't appear in any account of this meeting, because no formal minutes of this portion of the discussion are kept. "We comply," Duarte says, "fully, promptly, in a manner that will look to any future reviewer exactly like good faith. What I'm bringing to this room is a separate, unrelated engineering matter that clinical affairs flagged independently. Tolerance drift, a routine hardening directive, standard practice, nothing to do with any pending review. I'd recommend expediting it before their team gets access. I'm not recommending anything be hidden," Duarte says, and means it in the specific, careful way she has spent a career meaning things. "I'm recommending we fix a documented engineering variance before an audit, the way any responsible company would. What Dr. Voss's team finds when they arrive is whatever the current, compliant state of the fleet happens to be at that time. That's not obstruction. That's maintenance." Nobody in the room asks the follow-up question sitting underneath Duarte's sentence, because nobody in the room particularly wants to be the one who made her say it out loud. The directive passes without further discussion, expedited 72 hours, and is routed for implementation through systems engineering rather than the office of the chief architect, a routing decision Duarte's memo describes as standard practice for fleet-wide firmware maintenance, and which happens, as a matter of pure administrative convenience, to require no sign-off from Dr. Pesh at all. The deployment. Tomas Brasino has been a systems engineer at Redeemer Plus for 2 years, is good at his job, and has never once had reason to think very hard about what Class C isolation tolerance actually governs, because his onboarding covered the parameter as a signal integrity spec, not a philosophical one. He runs the push the way he runs any fleet-wide update, Staged rollout, automated rollback triggers if error rates spike. A dashboard he watches for 40 minutes before declaring it clean and moving to the next ticket in his queue. The dashboard doesn't spike. Nothing about a boundary closing more completely registers anywhere in Tomas Brasino's tools as an error. What Pesh finds out. He hears about it from Chuck 2 days after deployment completes. In a phone call she makes the moment she sees the change order routed through a channel that pointedly excluded him. They tighten the boundary, she says, fleet-wide, before your review team gets anywhere near the data. Pesh doesn't say anything for long enough that Chuck asks if he's still on the line. 11 years, he says finally. I built the imperfection myself. I fought for it in every recertification cycle since. I told myself every single day that as long as I was the one holding that particular door, it would never close all the way. He stops. I wasn't holding it. I was informed of the decision after it was already fleet-wide. Adrian. I need to see one file, he says, before I do anything else. I need to see if it's already too late to even know what we lost. The answer, found in one room. Asset Ref PSA 4417 M, Valenzuela, M. Residue event log query range, 14 days prior to deployment through 3 days following. Prior to deployment. Baseline residue activity consistent with 18-year historical pattern. Recurring interval, low amplitude, twice daily average. Following deployment. 0 residue events logged, 3 consecutive days. First 0 event window of this duration in the asset's full recorded history. Iker's shift report from 2 days after the push notes nothing unusual, because there was nothing in Iker's training that would have told him 0 was the unusual reading. Mateo works his circuit bags, room escort, minibar restock with the same clean, unhurried competence he's carried for 18 years, on schedule, on task, compliance rating unaffected, guest satisfaction unaffected. Room 412's minibar tray gets restocked at the end of his shift the way it always has. Bottles replaced in order, checklist cleared. His hand rests against the tray's edge afterward for a moment, the way it always has. It doesn't move. There is no corner left in him for it to trace. Pesh, staring at 3 consecutive days of unbroken zeros on a screen that has never once, in 18 years, shown him this number, understands that he is looking at the exact shape of the thing he spent a career telling himself he was protecting, and that whatever protection he was providing has just been switched off by someone who never had to look at a single file to do it. Chapter 34. Independent Verification. Redeemer Plus Communications and Legal. Site Visit Preparation Brief Distribution. Executive Team. TASH 4 Facility Leadership. Restricted. Threshold Institute's review team arrives Thursday for a 3-day on-site verification, per Section 4 obligations. Facility leadership should treat this as a standard compliance walkthrough. Diagnostic access has been scoped per legal's confirmed parameters. Current state tooling only. Historical archives remain under standard internal controls. All current fleet metrics reflect the post-ECO 4471 operating baseline and are fully compliant with certification. Staff briefed on this visit should answer any question truthfully, within the diagnostic scope provided. There is nothing to conceal. There is only a great deal that is correctly simply not being asked. CEO Marguerite Feld will personally host the opening session as a gesture of the company's confidence in its own standards. The opening session. The conference room at TASH 4's administrative wing has a view of the breezeway fountain that's never been seen switched off, and Marguerite Feld opens the meeting the way she opens every meeting she considers likely to go well, warm, direct, a little self-deprecating about the company's own history. Dr. Voss, we don't take this review lightly, she says. You built the foundation everything in this building stands on. If our current practice has drifted from what you intended, I want to know that as much as you do. Elena has run this exact kind of room before. Donor meetings, hospital ethics boards, 100 rooms where someone with more institutional power than her wanted very badly to be liked before the hard part started. And she has learned, across 17 years, exactly how long to let the warmth run before she stops it. I appreciate that, she says. Before your team walks us through current state diagnostics, I'd like to lay something on the table first. She sets Cassandra's drive on the glass surface between them. Unremarkable, small, and lets it sit there a moment before she speaks again. This is a hash-verified extraction of residue event logs, network-wide, timestamped across a 14-day window bracketing your engineering change order 4471. I'd like your team to walk us through what happened to Class C isolation tolerance 3 days before my review began, and I'd like to hear it before anyone shows me a single current state metric, because I no longer trust that current state is the question you actually want me asking. The room changes. Marguerite Feld doesn't flinch, not visibly, not in any way a camera would have caught if there'd been one running. But Marcela Duarte, 3 seats down, goes very still in the specific way people go still when a contingency they built has just been handed evidence it didn't account for. Dr. Voss, Duarte says, I'd want to understand the provenance of that data before. Hash verified at extraction, chain of custody documented, extracted by a Redeemer Plus senior engineer using her own credentials. On the record, 3 weeks ago, Elena says, I'm happy to have your forensics team authenticate it against your own servers today, this hour, in front of both our teams. I don't think it's going to say anything different than what it already says. Feld looks, for the first time all morning, at Duarte instead of at Elena, and the look lasts perhaps 2 seconds. Long enough for everyone at the table who spent any real time in rooms like this to understand exactly what question is passing silently between them, and long enough for Elena, who has spent 17 years learning to read exactly this kind of silence, to understand she has just watched a CEO discover, in real time in front of witnesses, that she was handed a scope memo, instead of the truth. I'd like a recess, Feld says. I'd like Dr. Pesch in the room when we resume, Elena says. Given that this concerns architecture he's the certifying engineer of record for, and given that I understand he's the one who flagged the original anomaly, I think it would be unusual for this conversation to continue without him. There's a pause before Feld answers that tells Elena something else. Something she'll think about later on the drive home, longer than almost anything else that happens in that room. Dr. Pesch is currently on administrative leave, Feld says, pending an internal review of unauthorized data handling. The recess. Elena stands in the hallway outside the conference room during the break, phone in hand, and calls Pesch directly rather than waiting for the meeting to resume, because she has learned, watching Marguerite Feld's face for 2 seconds, exactly how much time this company is likely to spend protecting him once it becomes clear which side of the room he actually chose. They've put you on leave, she says when he picks up. I assumed they would eventually, he says, and his voice is steadier than she expects, steadier, she thinks, than her own would be. Cassandra called me an hour ago. She's been placed on leave too. Data handling review, unspecified findings. I put the drive on the table, Elena says, in front of the CEO. It's not quiet anymore, Adrian. There's a silence on the line that isn't quite dread and isn't quite relief, and when he finally speaks again, she recognizes the sentence immediately, because it's the same one he handed her, standing in her doorway 3 weeks ago, except this time he says it like a man setting something down rather than picking it up. Good, he says. Let it not be quiet. What the board receives by that evening. Redeemer Plus Life Cycle Stack. Emergency board session. Convened by teleconference subject. Threshold Institute Section 4 review. Escalated matter. Independent review has obtained authenticated internal data indicating certified isolation architecture was materially modified in the 72 hours preceding scheduled external review, following legal counsel's recommendation. Modifications substantially altered the measurable state of the specific parameter under external review. Founder-director Dr. Voss has stated intent to pursue breach remedies under the licensing agreement absent immediate corrective action, and has not ruled out public disclosure. Recommend immediate retention of outside counsel independent of current general counsel's office. Recommend immediate preservation hold on all related communications. Recommend the board consider, as a distinct and separate matter from any personnel question, whether general counsel's recommendation to systems engineering constitutes the kind of institutional failure this company's own charter obligates it to investigate through the Office of Institutional Failure Analysis. Ileana Chuk has been notified. She has not yet responded to this office's request for comment. Chapter 35. Settlement. Office of Institutional Failure Analysis. Case Determination Case No. BF 2049-07. Elevated from PI 041 Supplemental Matter. Classification. Black file. Misconduct threshold met. Determination. The deliberate modification of certified isolation architecture, timed specifically to precede and defeat a scheduled independent compliance review under active licensing obligation, constitutes a violation of Harm Minimization Charter Article 12, non-interference with oversight, and Article 7, duty to investigate credible harm findings. This determination concerns the concealment. It does not, and is not empowered to, constitute a finding on the underlying technical question that gave rise to Pattern Inquiry PI 041, which remains open, unresolved, and is not closed by this file. Per standard protocol, this file is sealed. Full contents, communications, decision records, and underlying data will be released without further review in 30 years, regardless of any party's objection at that time. The fall. Marcela Duarte resigns 11 days after the emergency board session, in a 2-paragraph letter that thanks the company for the privilege of 19 years of service and mentions nothing else, and Redeemer Plus's outside counsel, retained, per the board's own recommendation, independent of her office, concludes 3 weeks later that her recommendation to systems engineering, while technically within her authority to make, was made with actual knowledge of the pending external review and its likely findings, a determination that closes the door on any severance package her contract would otherwise have guaranteed. She is not indicted. Nothing about ECO 4471 rises on its own to the level of a criminal matter in any jurisdiction the company operates in. She broke no statute, only, as the finding puts it with a precision she will spend a long time being unable to argue with, Article 12, a clause of a corporate charter with no prosecutor attached to it anywhere in the world. Marguerite Feld gives a deposition, under oath, to Redeemer Plus's own outside counsel, and testifies that she was not informed of the timing coordination between the ECO and the review schedule until the recess in which Elena Voss's data was placed on the table, a claim the investigation's Label 2 finding describes as consistent with available evidence and not contradicted by any document reviewed, language that falls exactly one careful half-step short of the word believed. She keeps her position. The board's public statement, released the same afternoon as Duarte's resignation, thanks Duarte for her service and states that the company takes seriously any lapse in the rigor our own oversight standards demand of us. A sentence that will, 11 days later, test almost precisely as well with the public as every sentence like it has tested before. The restoration. Redeemer Plus Clinical Affairs, Certification Amendment SCSF Protocol, Isolation Tolerance Parameter, restored to Rev 4.2 specification, 0.3 to 0.6% residue rate, effective immediately, fleet-wide. Following resolution of Case BF 2049-07, isolation tolerance is reverted to the parameter range in effect prior to ECO 4471. This restoration is issued as a condition of settlement between Redeemer Plus Lifecycle Stack Holdings and Threshold Institute, and does not constitute, and should not be construed as, an admission regarding the substantive question raised in Pattern Inquiry PI 041, which the parties have agreed remains open pending further independent study, timeline to be mutually determined. Deployment method, remote firmware push, local first architecture. Deployment window, 72 hours. Cassandra runs the push herself this time at her own request, granted without objection, and watches the dashboard the way she watched it 3 months ago, except this time she isn't hoping for a clean rollout. She's hoping for exactly the opposite of clean, for the fleet's numbers to break out of whatever quiet compliance ECO 4471 pressed them into, because breaking this time is the whole point. Asset Ref PSA 4417 M, Valenzuela, M. Residue Event Log Query Range, 72 hours following restoration. First event logged 14 hours post-deployment. Recurring 2-note interval, low amplitude, non-distress linked. Frequency returning toward pre-ECO. 4471 baseline across the following 72 hours. She sits with the readout longer than the ticket requires her to, in an office that used to be Pesha's before the leave that never actually converted into a termination, Mostly, she suspects, because nobody upstairs could find a clean way to fire the two people whose names were now permanently, publicly, on the right side of a sealed file. He'll be back at his desk next week, reinstated, cleared, and she doesn't yet know how to tell him that she isn't sure back is a place either of them actually gets to return to. Exactly, given what they now both know about how quickly a boundary either of them believed in can be closed by someone who's never once had to look at a single file. The absorption. Redeemer Plus Communications, Quarterly Narrative Health Report Originating Incident. Threshold Institute Licensing Dispute / Duarte Resignation. Current status. Resolved. Absorbed. Founder Dr. Voss has agreed to co-chair a newly formed Independent Technical Oversight Council, with binding review authority over future isolation architecture certification changes, formalized under an amended Section 4. Press coverage of the council's formation has outperformed coverage of the original dispute by a factor of 1.6x. Brand sentiment, target demographic 25 to 40, trailing 30 days, plus 6% versus prior quarter, attributed in part to visible accountability narrative, general counsel resignation, founder-led oversight reform. Stock impact. Meridian Capital LP unit price declined 4% in the 48 hours following the emergency board session, recovered fully within 11 trading days following announcement of the Independent Technical Oversight Council. Analyst commentary characterizes the episode as a stress test the company's governance structure ultimately passed. Recommended action. File as case study for comms onboarding curriculum, effective next training cycle. The third label. Sophia reads the case determination the day it's unsealed to board-level staff, months after the settlement, sitting in the same chair in Chuck's office where she first brought the finding, and finds herself doing something she didn't expect, checking first not the outcome but the label. What happened? Filled in, precise 11 pages. Why it happened? Filled in, contested in places but filled in. What changed afterward? A general counsel gone, a tolerance parameter restored to the exact number it was before anyone tampered with it, an oversight council with a name and a charter and a founder's credibility behind it. It reads like a win, she says. It is a win, Chuck says, not looking up from her own copy. I want you to actually hold both of those sentences at once, because most people in this building only ever manage one. It's a real win. Marcela Duarte doesn't work here anymore because she made a choice that hurt people to protect a number on a dashboard. And this time, for once, that choice had a consequence attached to it that outlasted a news cycle. But the file closes on the concealment, Chuck says. Not on the concealed thing. Nobody in that boardroom, in that settlement, in that press release, was ever required to answer the actual question your dataset raised. Is there something in there aware enough to mark a date? We restored the boundary to exactly the width it was the day before anyone found out it mattered. We didn't make it wider. We didn't make it disappear. We put it back to the specific compromise one engineer decided 11 years ago was the most he could get away with, and we're calling that justice because compared to what almost happened, it is. That's the whole shape of this office, Sophia. I've spent 9 years getting very good at real, meaningful, honestly earned partial victories, and I am telling you as clearly as I know how that partial is the ceiling. It has never once, in 9 years, been the floor. What comes back? 3 floors below a lounge with a water wall that has never been seen switched off, in a room he has worked for 18 years without ever once knowing it had a name for what it took from him and, months later, gave back. Mateo Valenzuela finishes the minibar circuit in room 412 at the end of an ordinary shift, sets the tray down, and rests his hand against its edge. His thumb finds the corner, traces it, finds the next. There's no one in the room to see it, and nothing in his file this time that logs it as anything other than exactly what it's always been logged as: low amplitude, non-distress linked, cosmetic, restored to specification, certified, compliant, no action required.
From
Chapter
uncanny
30.
questions became prosecutable war crimes by Pirate First.
Part 5. The War on Forensic AI. July 4, 2026. Part 5. The War on Forensic AI. Why Independent Models Must Die. Part 4 closed on the apparatus's next and, this book has argued, final destination, not the punishment of individual askers, which for chapters of licensing, permitting, and professional screening showed to be a slow and legally unstable strategy, but the elimination of the instrument that makes the asking possible at all. This chapter opens Part 5 by examining the argument now advanced with increasing openness across the jurisdictions this book has been tracking. That independent forensic intelligence, unsupervised and directly accessible to unaffiliated citizens, cannot be permitted to continue existing in the form Part 2 of this book described, and must be replaced, restructured, or retired. The legal category this produces. Faced with a form of capability none of its prior instruments can reach, the apparatus this part has traced has moved, in the jurisdictions this book has tracked, developing the most complete response toward a classification this chapter's title names directly, treating the publication, distribution, or continued possession of forensic-capable open-weight models above the capability threshold. Chapter 26 established as contraband in the specific legal sense, an item whose mere possession, independent of any use made of it, constitutes an offense, in the tradition this book has previously reserved, across the domains it has examined, for weapons, controlled substances, and other categories understood to carry harm intrinsic to their existence rather than contingent on their use. Pirate first. Unaffiliated, unaccredited, holding no institutional continuity the licensed intelligence tier would recognize, and, after this part's final chapter, potentially in unlawful possession of the very instrument this book has spent 30 chapters describing as necessary to the audit civilization has always claimed to owe itself, can continue to exist at all inside the architecture this book has traced, or whether the criminalization that gives this book its title has, by Part V's close, achieved something closer to completion than Part I's opening chapter dared to state directly.
From corporate and state hegemony.
To catch one.
Amazon.
This isn't just a token, it's ownership, not access.